So, okay, well, you'll be happy to know we won't be talking about diagramming today. So, or maybe you'll be sad. No, maybe you'll be sad to know. But this session and the next one, I'd like to just turn our attention to really sort of a review of the latter steps in the process. Some of which we haven't actually talked about in a while. So I wanted to focus attention on some of the latter steps in relation to the prophetic genre, okay? So a lot of this there'll be some review, but hopefully it will reinforce or remind you of some important things as we approach preparing for the sermon and delivering the sermon. So with that, let me just pull up our notes here. This again is the 9th session in relation to module 4 for the prophetic genre. And here we want to focus our attention now, moving from getting the main focus of our exegesis and then moving towards the sermon. And if you'll remember, the steps that we've looked at so far, the first 3 focused on the book. We covered those in sessions 2 to 4. And those were assignments 9 to 11, as you can see. And then the prophetic passage analysis, we spent some time on in class, in our face-to-face, but then also we reviewed it in the 5th and 6th sessions, and that was assignment 12. And then the last couple of sessions, we focused our attention primarily on diagramming, just to review that a little bit, as well as observations. Significant words, we didn't spend a lot of any time on really, but the format for those, there's nothing new when it comes to word studies. In the prophetic genre, it's the same for any genre, the same approach. And so in the assignment, there's an example of it that just follows the same format that we've done for the other genres. Today, I wanted to turn our attention to the next few steps in the process. After doing the word study, then now is the time where, after you've done all of the work looking at the book overall, the prophetic analysis, passage analysis, the diagram, the textual observations, the word studies, so you've done a lot of all that work you do on your own, but now we're at a place where we're ready to consult the resources. Okay, and again, as I have encouraged you before, it's, I think, best to wait until toward the end of your study to look at resources rather than do that at the beginning. And we can just be reminded that resources are just a helpful way for us. Really, I think the resources can help us in 2 ways. Or maybe let me put that question to you first before I respond. How would you, we talk about resources, we're talking about commentaries, sermons, Bible encyclopedias, word study books, Bible handbooks, other types of books related to the passage or the topic, commentaries, I think I mentioned already. What are some of the advantages to using the resources? How can they be helpful to us in the study process? What do you guys think?
I believe, Pastor, the resource work other materials to correct my work.
To do what with your work? Sorry,
of course, I will work my outline. Then after that, I will consult the extra biblical resources to let me know my outline is correct.
Yes, that's one very helpful thing about them, is they help us to know if we have misunderstood anything in the passage, right? They are sort of a protection again, good resources, those that come from, you know, good scholars or pastors. They can help us, prevent us from going, you know, off on a passage in the wrong direction. So that's good. They're sort of like a protection, like a fence for us. What are some other benefits of using resources? Anybody?
To have a better understanding of the passage or the text, Pastor Tim.
Yeah. Not only do they protect us from, you know, having a very wrong interpretation, they can also contribute to our understanding of what the passage does mean. I mean, that's probably a primary reason we use resources, is as a guide and a help. Now, I would say those are probably the two biggest helps, right? They provide us information to better understand the passage, and resources can prevent us from misinterpreting a passage. What are some of the things that we need to be careful about when we use resources? Some cautions. Yeah, Alan.
Certain. There's a negative aspect also, because from what we have been learning from these studies that we're doing here, I realized that some of so-called scholars are actually dictated by their theological persuasions. For example, with regards to eschatological implications of the prophecies. For example, in the book of Isaiah, I realized that some of them are actually, in terms of the fulfillments of those prophecies, they believe that they are fulfilled and are being fulfilled in the church. I think many of them are amillennialists or post-millennialists, something like that. But yes, there are contributions in terms of understanding with regards to the interpretations of the many passages that otherwise we couldn't understand. But, you know, there's a lot of help that I've got from these studies that we're doing here. For example, just to reflect on the imagery, what do they communicate? Something like that. I think last Wednesday, I asked them to, how do you feel these descriptions? How do you think what are these descriptions portraying? And their implications to us, something like that. And those are the things that I've learned here.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yes, so commentaries are, yes, very helpful. But now, because of these studies that we're doing, now I could sense their persuasions.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, I think, especially with prophetic books of scripture. There's a tendency by all of us, really, but there's a tendency for scholars, pastors, to impose their theological position onto the passage, where they look at a text and read it through their theology rather than let the text speak for itself or the author speak in the context. And this is really hard to do. It's very difficult not to put our theological position onto a passage. So that's why we've spent a lot of time focusing on trying to understand the author and the context and the flow of thought and the background and all of these things to hopefully allow the author to speak from the passage rather than, well, because I believe in that there's no millennial kingdom, therefore this must be something else. Or because I do believe in a millennial kingdom, this passage must be talking about that. Well, we have to be careful. We don't presume on the meaning of the passage by our own belief system. And like I said, that's difficult. I think all of us have a bias, right? All of us approach everything in life with from our own understanding, right? And so, especially when we come to the scripture, this is true for any text where we can impose our theological position on the passage before we understand the passage. So I see this happen as you bring this up, Alan, I see this happen a lot in the prophetic books, especially. So this is something just to look for, as you're reading a resource. Okay, is the person showing me how he's drawing that from the passage, or is he bringing in all these other passages first and trying to explain this passage? You understand what I'm saying? It's better to go the other way around. Try to understand, is he focusing on that text and what it means in the context first? And then it's okay if you see links to other passages after that. But we have to be careful that we don't, or we have to look for, as you're looking at resources, is the person, showing an effort to identify the meaning in its context, or do you see him bringing in other passages or other theological ideas in interpreting that passage early? So you got to look for that. Does that make sense? I think this probably, Alan, you bring up probably the most important caution for the prophetic resources or resources for prophetic books is as you're reading it, just look. And notice too, it's important to know, especially for the prophetic books, what is the theological position of the author? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Just to know that. Okay, that doesn't mean he'll have a wrong interpretation. But you should know, okay, if this guy is a dispensationalist, or if he is a amillennialist, or a post-millennial, or a pre-tribulation rapture, or post-trib, it's helpful to know what his eschatology is, because then you may better identify, okay, is he bringing his eschatology into this passage, or is he letting this passage speak out towards his eschatology? So how might we do that? How might we find out, what is the background of the author of the resource? What might be some ways to do that?
Pastor Tim, actually, that's what I've realized about you, how you so intent on focusing us on the text and to just let the text, the author, speak through that text. And so somehow feel the implications of what the author is saying in the text. And so somehow you have that feeling coming from the understanding of what he's saying with regards to the end times. So something like that. I think it helps bring you closer to the authorial intent. Now I understand what's the meaning of just focus on the text, because I've been saying that even before. But now seriously, it's really, the implications are really powerful in terms of understanding the text. And I learned it here in our study.
Thanks. I'm encouraged by that. I'm hoping to, when we gather for module 5, I'm thinking about maybe going over a few passages with you guys. A few key passages that really, I think, trying to understand the passage, these key prophetic passages like Daniel 9 or Revelation 19. 20 or Zechariah 14, Matthew 24. Hopefully we can look at some of these passages and see, let the text speak for itself to show us what the prophetic, what the prophecy is saying. But what might be some ways, it's just helpful to know what the background of the author is. Can you guys think of any ways to find that background out, or at least understand what their eschatology is? Any ideas?
For me, Pastor, when I read the Bible, I used to look the audience first.
Look for the audience?
Yeah. Just for example, in the book of Matthew, who is the audience and what is the author meant in his letter?
Oh, right. Sure. When we're actually studying the text of Scripture, yes, definitely. I was talking more about the commentator or the pastor, the resource author.
Yes, Pastor.
How might we figure out, let's say you're reading a commentary on Zechariah, and it's written by some author. How might you find out what that commentary author, what his eschatology is, what his position is? Any ideas?
Example for the book of Matthew, when it comes to chapter 24, of course, we need the assistant of the commentaries, because, of course, the audience of Matthew is the Jews. That's why Matthew presented Jesus to the Jews king. Because some of the churches here interpreted Matthew chapter 24, the rapture. No, it's not addressed to the church, it is addressed to the Jews.
Yeah, that's true. And it's Jesus is responding to a question, 3 questions actually, asked by the disciples. And I think if you study that passage and just look at it in light of the events of the passage, I think Jesus is just specifically answering those 3 questions. As you go through, you can see that. So hopefully we can go through that passage together in May when we gather, which, by the way, James, you saw my response. May 1st through the 5th is the module. Okay, so that's Monday to Friday. Okay, no problem. I responded. So yeah, May 1st to the 5th is our module. So we'll be doing the preaching labs course for that. So you can preach your Zechariah Revelation sermons. And then also my hope is to also maybe go through a few prophetic passages with you, just to talk about eschatology. And then Brother Freddie from Davao should be with us as well. And so we might I might have him go through maybe Habakkuk or a prophetic book with you, and just go through the process again, just to reinforce that. So that's the idea when we gather in May. So I know 3 months sounds like a long time, but keep working on those assignments, because it'll come quickly, especially with Easter in April, so that we'll have to lose some time there. But try to stay on it. This is the hardest module, but if you can get through this, guys, it's definitely gets a lot I don't want to say easier, but less work. There'll be less demanding work in the modules 5 and 6. In fact, really, module 6 is just lectures, honestly. And we'll preach 1 sermon in module 6. Module 5, you're just preparing for one message, 1 sermon from 2 Timothy. So we'll be back in the epistles, praise God, and it'll be just 1 sermon. So if you can get through, just keep pushing through this module 4, get everything done, and it'll be a lot less stressful to finish the last 2. And then after module 6, when we meet for module 6, that'll be pastoral ministry. So our focus will be on things related to the church, to be leaders in the church, pastoral issues, and then graduation will be right at the end of that module. So you won't have any homework after that when we meet. And again, that'll probably be toward November or something like around that time frame. So you'll have some time. But to graduate, of course, you have to get all your assignments done and your sermons preached as well. So anyway, that's a side issue. With resources, it's just helpful to know a little bit of the background of the author, the resource. And oftentimes, if it's somebody well-known, you know, if you're listening to a sermon from John MacArthur or John Piper or Steve Lawson, you know, they're well-known in terms of their positions. Sometimes, though, if you're looking at a commentary, the author may not be a well-known person. So you're going to want to, sometimes the book itself will have information, you know, where the author studied, or where, if they're a professor, it may say where there's teaching. And then sometimes you may have to, if you can get online and, you know, look up the person's name and just see if they're teaching at a Reformed seminary, then they're probably a millennial in their eschatology. So it'll help you, I think, if you know that, because then when you read the resource or listen to the sermon or whatever it is, you'll be able to say, oh, wait a minute, he just imposed his theology on the passage there. He didn't explain that comment from the text. That came from his theological position. So it's just helpful to know that. But like I said, it's okay if someone has a different theological position. You know, we can still learn much from good and godly men. We just want to, you know where they're coming from, because it's important. And too, for us, we want to always make sure that we are not imposing our theological position before we interpret a passage. You know, that should come out, you know, at the end of the process. Another thing to be careful about with resources, and I've, you know, mentioned this a few times, is, you know, we wait till toward the end of our study to consult a resource rather than early on, right? What would be some reasons for that? Why is it better to wait to do our own study first before we consult resources? What are some advantages of that? Anybody?
For me, Pastor Tim, it helped me to discern my own insights. And there are many commentaries I read, I don't agree, I don't just, I really feel confused. When I feel confused, I don't go with them anymore. So it's really helpful, yeah, especially have the Lord speaking to me personally from the passage. Of course, we have insights, but the commentaries help to reconcile, or it might be by virtue of their studying more than what I do. There are a lot of materials in the background, whatever archaeologists and all this. That is where put them together.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you haven't studied the passage, then whatever the resource says is going to sound correct, right? I mean, because they have studied the passage, so they're going to present, you know, their interpretation. And usually, you know, most people who've written a commentary or preached a sermon are going to have at least studied the passage on their own. So what they say is going to sound correct, most likely. So you want to be able to have your own study first so that you can evaluate, whether or not that person drew his interpretation out of the passage or he's bringing it from somewhere else, because you want to be able to, in a sense, like have a conversation with the author, so to speak, where as he explains things, you can more easily be able to say, yeah, that I saw that in the passage, or that makes sense from what the author was saying. Or you may say, oh, wait a minute, that's nowhere in this passage. You're bringing that from somewhere else. And so, but if you're not familiar with the text, if you haven't studied on your own, then you're not going to be as able to know if the author is explaining from the passage or not. So it's more easy. It's easier to be influenced by the commentator rather than the text if you haven't studied the text. That makes sense? So, again, I think resources are a really, really useful tool, but we need to use them wisely. And I know it's hard because we're busy. We have a lot of responsibility in the church and with our family and with our homes. And so it can be, you may not have a lot of time. And so it can be very tempting to just go to the resource because I don't have time to prepare the sermon. So let me just see what this guy says. And, I understand those pressures, but we have to be careful and at least give some study first on our own before looking at a resource. James, did you have something you were going to say?
Yes, for me, Pastor Tim, with other resources, that helped me in the historical background. This one that I run most when I look for other resources, only the historical background. And also to find out some references. Sometimes I don't know it was stated in the other book like that. So other resources that help me. But what Pastor Alan told, I usually focus on what the author of the book.
Yeah.
Sometimes most it goes beyond what I understand of my passage. So it makes me more it continues my mind. So that's why I rather focus on my text, and then when I look for other resources, the reference for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, and it reminds me that, if you are under pressure for your time, I think one way that resources can help you with that is, like you've said, James, sometimes just getting the historical background, if you don't have the time to do all of that study yourself, I think getting the historical background, maybe the occasion for the book, some of those, the geographical, the places that are mentioned, the people that are mentioned, commentaries and encyclopedias can be a helpful tool with that. So if you don't have the time to do all that work yourself, you can use them for the background of the book and those things. I think when you actually get to the passage, though, you definitely want to do your own work in the text first. So if you have to save time, certainly it's okay I would say to use a resource perhaps for the historical the background context, or even the outline of the book. Again, it's still better to do that yourself, but I understand sometimes you just don't have the time. But I think definitely don't, when you get to the text that you're preaching on, do your own work in that passage first. Don't Don't rely on the interpretation of someone else at the beginning. Otherwise, remember, Paul told Timothy, you be diligent, Timothy, to present yourself, Timothy, approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, you handling accurately the word of truth. So Paul tells Timothy, you need to be diligent to understand the text. He said, you need to be diligent to accurately teach it. So I think, to me, that says I need to put the work in, because I will answer for how I interpret this passage. I will answer to the Lord. And so if I just go to my shelf and, pull out the commentary and just say, oh, that's what he said, that's what I will say. Well, one, that's not being diligent. and two, but I'm going to answer for what I say to God's people, not the author of this book. All right, because I'm going to be standing before my congregation. This guy isn't. This is actually a good commentary on Amos, but I need to remember that I'm accountable before the Lord when I teach his word. And yes, this guy is too, he's interpreting the Bible, but he's not the one that's standing up in the pulpit to this congregation, to your church, to your congregation. So we want to make sure we remember, that words that Paul gave to Timothy, I don't think just applied to Timothy, right? That he was giving exhortation to a young pastor that it does apply to all of us. So I take that passage very seriously when considering how much effort do I put into studying the passage myself. And I think and each one of us, and even each week may have a different amount of time. Next week you may have 25 hours, but the week after that, maybe only 10 hours, and the week after that, maybe 8 hours. So we can only be faithful with the time we have. And that's, I think, what Paul's point to Timothy is, you need to be diligent. So be faithful with the time that you have. Some of us have a lot more time than others. Some of us have a better ability to study than others, right? Some of us can, read a commentary very quickly and understand it. Some of us can do diagramming, more easily than others, or all of these things. But God's not, God has given us the abilities that each of us have, right? And he's given us the time that each of us has. Are we going to be faithful with those things? Okay, not all of us will preach like, John MacArthur or Steve Lawson or John Piper. Okay, those are specially gifted men. But they need to be faithful as well with their 10 talents, and we need to be faithful with our 3 talents or our 1 talent, right? Or for me, maybe half a talent. But so just don't be discouraged about what time you have or don't have, or what struggles you may have in studying, preparing. Just be faithful and work hard. I think that's the focus. And I think the idea of when Paul tells Timothy, you be diligent, or you make every effort, you give it your full effort to show yourself approved. And God will know. He'll know if you're being faithful. He'll know if you had a very hard week. He'll know if you just didn't have enough time that week. He knows if you have trouble reading, if maybe your eyes, so it's harder for you to read. He knows those things. And he also knows if you gave your best effort despite those challenges. So this is an encouragement to you. Use resources, but be careful, with them. They can be a great help, but they also can be a temptation to not be diligent ourselves. I I listed, and I'll put these in my notes. Here are some helpful general resources online, resources that I think, here's a commentary set by Tom Constable that I think have found helpful. John MacArthur's sermons. Now, he doesn't do much with the prophets. I think only Zechariah and maybe Daniel, I think he preached through. But most of his is New Testament. Bible Hub has some good commentaries that you can access, as well as Bible Gateway. There's some helpful sermons by Martin Lloyd-Jones I'd recommend. And then for Bible Encyclopedia, the internationalstandardbible.com is a good resource, as well as Nave's Topical Bible. Okay, so these are just some good general resources. Some helpful commentaries for the prophets are these. So some you may be able to get access to, but generally speaking, I've found these to be good commentaries. Again, all of this will be in notes that I post, so you don't have to write these down now. You can refer to them. There's many individual commentaries that are good. These are just sets. Maybe I should put that, commentary sets for the prophets. All right, because there's a lot of good individual ones, but just as far as a set for all of them, here's a few examples. I don't think any of these are available online, but just want you to be aware of that. And then as you use the resources, I would suggest for the assignment, I'll get to that in a minute. So for using the resources, I suggest just a real simple approach. Identify those that you think will be helpful. Read through the resource. So let's say you're studying Zechariah chapter 2. Read through the resource. And by the way, I forgot to mention, if you've done your own study ahead of time, when you read through the resource, you will be able to read through that resource much more quickly. You will be able to use it more effectively because you'll already be familiar with the passage. So a lot of things he says, you'll be like, yeah, that's what I found. Or yeah, that makes sense. But if you haven't studied, everything he says will be new. So you'll be taking lots of notes or cutting and pasting a lot. Whereas if you've studied already, you'll be able to read through quickly and think, oh, I didn't think about that point. Or you'll read through and you'll be able to pick out new things or things you didn't notice. But if you haven't studied ahead of time, that'll be a lot slower process. Believe me, you may have learned this also, but I learned this the hard way. When I was my early preaching days, I would consult resources early. So I'd be spending all this time going through these resources and, because all of it was new to me. And so, and then what I found is a lot of resources say similar things, but when I studied the passage on my own, wow, I noticed a big difference in how fast I could go through a resource. And usually what I'll do is I'll have a pencil, and I'll just read through. Let's say I'm studying Amos, and I'm Amos chapter 3 or something, and I'll notice, okay, he's got 10 pages on that chapter. So I read through it, and what I do is I just if I see something that catches my interest or like that I think is important, I'll take a pencil and just either circle it or put a check next to it on the page and then keep going. So I just kind of reading through it, and then I'm just checking off those places that I think will be helpful. Then I come back to those places. So I finish reading the 10 pages, say, okay, all that he said on chapter 3. And then when I get to the end of that, then I put that down. Then I go and I get my next resource. Here's another one on Amos. And I say, okay, what did this guy say? Ah, he's got 15 pages. So I read through, and then again, I just check off those things that I think are helpful. And I do that. Let's say I have 5 commentaries, and I'll do that for all 5, because one thing I've noticed is a lot of commentaries may have similar statements. And so if I check it off in one, then when I go to the next one, it's like, oh yeah, this other guy said that already, so I don't need to check it there. And so what this I found for me, this is helps me to be more efficient. So I like to read, because if I'm by reading it and then all of a sudden, oh, that's important, I stop, I go copy it down, and then it's like, okay, where was I again? Oh yeah, here I was. And I read, oh, there's another one. And then I think that's less efficient than just read it through, check off as I go, those parts that I think are helpful. And then after I've read through the commentaries, I come back, and then I like to put down what I learned from them on my own document, my own study document. So, so then I'll compile basically, what did he say about Amos 3 verse 1? There was one thing this guy said that was helpful. So I'll put it down in and then maybe this guy had 2 things that were helpful about Amos 3 verse 1, and I'll put those down. And so then what I end up doing is I compile this document. Maybe I can, this is what I mean here, incorporate into an exegetical document verse by verse. So I may have chapter 3 verse 1 of Amos. You know, this author is Gary Smith. Gary Smith, you know, he said da 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 da. And then Gary Smith also had this important statement. He did a word study on this word that was helpful. And then this other guy, what's his name? Francis Anderson. Okay, he said something else. And then I'll go, okay, and then let's say, you know, John MacArthur had a helpful comment on this verse. And then I'll go to verse 2. Okay, this is how I do it. You don't have to do it this way, but it's just, I found over the years, for me, this is the most efficient way for me to use resources, because then once I'm done, I've got all their comments and I've organized them. So I can look at just verse 1 and see, and my own study, and then I can bring together what I think the text means based on that. Based on my study, then based on these input from then I can go to verse 2, verse 3, verse 4. So, or if it's a bigger chapter, you know, verses 1 to 4. You know, and then you can put collect the comments together. But and then later, if I listen to a sermon on that passage, let's say I listen to a sermon from John MacArthur, I may put in, illustration that he gave from this verse.
Meaning to say, Pastor, that author will give us the guide.
Give us a guide. The commentary author, you mean? Sorry, what were you referring to?
As you have written the wall, Pastor, concerning about the authors of the commentaries and gather the ideas there, my understanding is to collect their idea as a guide for our study.
Yes. And if you've done the study already, then as you read this commentary, there may be 5 or 6 things that are helpful. Whereas if you don't study yourself, there may be 20 things that you think are helpful because you haven't thought about any of it yet. But if you've already done your own study, you'll find that you'll be much more efficient as you read through the resource, because you'll be more familiar with the passage, and some things you've already figured out, or when he says something, you're like, oh, that makes sense because I thought about that. And okay, I'm going to write that down. But you won't write the whole paragraph because you only take the one sentence or phrase that was helpful from him. Okay. So yes, and then I would take that. I myself would just take it and, you know, type it or copy it or whatever on my own study document. So now, you know, I have an exegetical document where I've got all the steps we've done, you know, for my passage. I've got the background of the book, the flow of the book. I've got the prophetic analysis of the passage. I've got the diagram, the word studies, all that stuff. And then I bring in the commentator and resource comments into that document. Okay. So.
Thank you, Pastor.
And I'll maybe when we gather together in May, I can show you a couple examples of that. But I just I think one of the, you know, for me, there's the two best reasons to wait in using resources are, first, we need to be diligent ourselves, as Paul told Timothy. And then secondly, I think you will be much more efficient and effective with the resources if you've already done your study. So those would be two important reasons. Okay, we got to move on. So for the assignment, I think 414, is it here? Let me, yeah. So assignment 14 for Zechariah is you'll be putting your consult resources, and all I want you to do for that, you don't have to show me all the stuff you pulled out of the resource, just show me the resource you used. Okay, so here's an example from Obadiah. These are resources I used for Obadiah in my study. And notice some of them are commentaries. One of them came from somebody's thesis. Another one came from Biblical Doctrines, the theology book, which, by the way, brothers, I'll be bringing, we'll have those on our next module. So I'll be able to finally get the Biblical Doctrine book to you. And then notice I've got, and I took these are some online commentary, and then a sermon I listened to. I don't know, did I show you, here, let me just do this. I think I may have already shown this to you, but a good place for sermons. Can you guys see my my internet window open here? Okay. A good place that I like to go for sermons is gracechurch.org. That is where John MacArthur pastors. And if you go to sermons, it not only has his sermons, it has the sermons preached from all the pastors there. You know, now this is very helpful because, you know, Grace Church is a large church. There's 5 or I don't know, 6,000, 7,000 people that attend. And so they have many fellowship groups that are really the size of large churches themselves. And they have very qualified teachers and pastors that oversee each of those fellowship groups. So like they may have a fellowship group for singles that's like 800 people. So these guys are all very well trained, and they record all the sermons from all these fellowship groups and from the evening services, from conferences. And so when you go to their website here, you go to sermons and then hit series. Let's say you're doing a message on Obadiah, for example. Oops, sorry. I want to go to, let's see, sermons. Wait a minute. There should be a search. Oh, by the way, here's all the Shepherds conferences, by the way, guys, going back over 20 years. So some of you I may have already shown this, I don't remember, but yeah, so if you want to go back 2016, here's all the sermons from the main sessions. So there's a ton of stuff here, but let's say I'm going to preach on Obadiah. I think go to sermons and there should be a search. Ah, here it is. So go to Grace Church teaching. I'll put this online resource on your document. And let's say, okay, I want to look for a sermon from Obadiah. What messages were preached from Obadiah that they have? And there's only one chapter. So, okay, now I'll just do a search. Okay, now some of this is in Spanish, so they have a Spanish ministry. So that may not be as helpful. But then notice here, here's a message by Jay Lennington. Here's a message from Obadiah by Josh Petrus, Will Varner, who's a very good teacher. Here's some from Jonathan Rourke. Now, Obadiah is not a very common book, so they don't have a lot of sermons from that. But here's 5. And if they put it on their website, that means this is a trusted resource. All right. These are going to be good messages. They'll be solid messages that you can. So if I want to listen to Will Varner here, I just hit him, and then it's his sermon or his teaching on that book. Okay. So gracechurch.org, go to sermons, and like I said, then you can look up. So let's say, you guys are teaching from Zechariah. So let's say you're doing Zechariah chapter 2. Okay. And there'll probably be a lot on this. Abner Chow, he's very good. So there's a few sermons on that chapter. Okay. So I'll put that website on the document there so you can have a reference to it. I think I may already have it. Do I? No, but I'll put it in. Okay. So for the assignment, all I want you to do is just identify the resources that you used. Okay. You don't have to put all the information you got from the resource on the assignment. You should do that for yourself, for your study. But for the assignment, you don't have to give me all of that. Okay? Any questions on the resources or? That makes sense, I hope. Okay.
Thank you, Pastor. It's a great help for us to reading in commentaries.
Yes. Like I said, we know commentaries can be very helpful if we use them responsibly. So that's the important part. Okay. Let me, I got to take care of one thing. I'll be right back. Give me one minute. Okay, guys? I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. All right. Okay, so after the resources, we've done basically all our study now and effort. All these steps are intended to lead us. The goal of our exegesis, all that time and effort that we've spent, is intended to lead us to the exegetical idea, kind of like a funnel. As we do all of these steps, the intent is to identify the exegetical idea, and that is simply, what is the author saying? The author's intended meaning. That's what the exegetical idea is. The exegetical idea is simply the author's intended meaning. Okay? And that comes from all of these steps that we've taken. And we've taught you, the approach we've taken in this course is to express that meaning with what we call the what, why, and how. Okay? Again, we covered this all the way back in the first module. This is the same thing that we've done in every module. The what is the subject of the text, that is stating the main point, summarizing his main point in a sentence. The author's point in this passage is, and then stating it. The why is the context of the text. That is, why did the author make that point? This is his point. Why did he say it? Okay, so that's the what and why. And then the how is just simply the outline. The author's flow of thought. What's the structure of the passage? How do we see him make that point? All right. And this is not expositional, it's exegetical. So it's the author's intended meaning. This isn't your sermon outline. This isn't your sermon main point. This is the, what does the author say? So you know, Obadiah, well, we'll actually look at an example in a moment. Okay. Let's do it right now, in fact. Let me ask Kazot, could you read Obadiah here 10 to 14, and then we'll do a what, why, how from this.
Obadiah 10 to 14. Because of violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame, and you will be cut forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered this gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were as one of them. Do not gloat over your brother's day, the day of his misfortune, and do not rejoice over the sons of Judah in the day of their destruction. Yes, do not boast in the day of their distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their disaster. Yes, you do not gloat over their calamity in the day of their disaster. Do not loot their wealth in the day of their disaster. Do not stand at the fork of the road to cut down their fugitives, and do not imprison their survivors in the day of their distress.
Sorry. We looked at this passage a little when we did our diagramming and our prophetic passage analysis earlier. But as we look at this text, you know, and assuming we've done all the other study, right? We're not just going to read a passage and come up with the what, why, how, right? Again, this comes from after we've done all of these other steps here, right? So this is what I came up with when I studied this passage for a what, why, how. The subject of the text. All right, let me do this. Okay, what's the point of the passage? What's the main focus of the passage? Again, this is the subject of the main point, is God will bring just judgment on Edom. Okay, that's the declaration here in this passage. And again, this is exegetical, so this is the author. You could even say it this way: Obadiah says that God will bring judgment, just judgment upon Edom. The why? Well, it's given in the passage. Because of their harsh treatment of Israel, or you could say even of their brother Israel. Okay? And then the how, I identified basically two paragraphs here. The first was the declaration of judgment, and then the second was the details of their crimes. Or you could put it this way, if you want to make it more, Obadiah's declaration of judgment, and Obadiah gives the details of their crimes. Again, this is not my sermon main point or outline. This is just from the text, okay? We'll do our sermon main point and our sermon outline later on. But this is just taking all that I've studied and bringing together for this passage what seems to be the main point. That's the what. Why does the author make that statement? That's the why. And then the how is the outline. Okay, and then the diagram may give me, the subpoints here, the reason for judgment, verse 10, and B may be we could do the statement for judgment, verse 10, and then the reason for judgment. We see both of those here. Okay, but again, this is the exegetical idea. It's from the author. So as you're doing your study, once you come to the end of it, once you've done all of these other steps, put together basically the what, why, how for the exegetical idea for your passage. And that will be the what is the main point of the passage, the why is the reason he gives that main point, and then the how is the outline. Okay? So make sure to do this, because this is what's going to, then you can go from that to, as you move towards your sermon. And we'll next time we gather, we'll remind ourselves, we'll review those steps as, okay, now that I've got the study, now that I understand the meaning of the author, the exegetical idea, okay, now I need to take that from the text now, and I'm moving towards my congregation. I understand the author. Now I need to take what he was saying to the people of his day and move towards the people I'm speaking to in my day. Now, how do I do that? We will review that together next time that we gather, and look at that, and then how do we remind ourselves of how we prepare the message, and then hopefully we can get through that next time, okay? But I need to end a little bit early today. But next week, if we could try to all be ready at 10, so we can sort of maximize our time together next time that we meet, okay? But just a reminder, a few of you guys, I think I noted on the message group, some of you haven't enrolled yet for module 5, so make sure to please do that. Even though we're not meeting for 3 months, make sure to go ahead and do it now, okay? Because really, we're still going through this semester, so we do it by semester. Really, is what's happening. So go ahead and do that if you could. All right, and I resent the form with the instructions. So if you have any questions, let me know. But the TEA, the home office is asking me, how come your students haven't enrolled yet? Oh, okay, I'll tell them. So don't get me in trouble. You're going to get me in trouble if you don't enroll. So anyway, any questions or anything from our discussion today? Okay, well, let me ask Dodong if you could close us in prayer.